October 5th was supposed to be one of the best days of my life. I had just been offered the chief resident position, which meant better pay, more responsibility, and a huge step toward my cardiology fellowship goals. I was practically floating on air when I drove to my parents' house that evening to share the news. I found them in the living room watching TV. Dad was in his usual recliner, and Mom was on the couch with her heating pad, which seemed to be a permanent fixture these days. I sat down across from them, barely able to contain my excitement. I told them about the promotion, explaining how competitive it was and how this would open doors for my future specialty training. Dad's face lit up immediately. He told me how proud he was and asked about the new responsibilities I'd have. His genuine happiness made me feel even better about the achievement. But Mom's reaction was completely different. Her expression grew darker as I talked, and I could see her getting more agitated. When I finished explaining the position, she immediately asked if this meant I'd be working even more hours. I admitted that yes, the schedule would be more demanding, but the experience would be invaluable. That's when she exploded. She told me I was being selfish and that I needed to think about my family responsibilities. She said her health was getting worse and that she needed me to move back home to help take care of her. When I tried to explain that this promotion was crucial for my career, she got even angrier. She stood up from the couch, throwing her heating pad aside, and told me I needed to choose between my career and my family. I was shocked by how quickly the conversation had escalated. I tried to stay calm and suggested we could hire a home health aide or look into other support options, but she wasn't having it. She said no stranger was going to take care of her, and that it was my duty as her daughter to be there. I reminded her that I was a doctor, that I had worked incredibly hard to get where I was, and that I couldn't just throw it all away. The argument got more heated, with both of us raising our voices. Dad tried to intervene, telling Mom to calm down and that we should be celebrating my success. But she turned on him too, saying he never supported her, and that he didn't understand how sick she was. I had seen her have these outbursts before, but this felt different. There was something almost desperate about her anger. That's when she said the words that changed everything. She screamed that she regretted not having an abortion when she was pregnant with me. She said if she had known I would grow up to be so selfish and uncaring, she would have terminated the pregnancy. She told me I was the worst mistake of her life, and that she wished I had never been born. The room went completely silent. Dad looked horrified and told her she had gone too far. I just stood there, feeling like I had been punched in the stomach. I couldn't believe my own mother had just told me she wished I didn't exist because I wouldn't give up my career to be her caretaker. I didn't say anything else. I grabbed my purse and walked out of the house, ignoring Dad calling after me. I sat in my car for 10 minutes trying to process what had just happened. My hands were shaking as I drove home, and I spent the rest of the night crying and wondering how our relationship had gotten to this point. The next day at the hospital was brutal. I tried to focus on my patients, but my mother's words kept echoing in my head. Every time I had a quiet moment, I found myself replaying the argument and wondering if maybe I really was being selfish. The guilt was overwhelming, and I started questioning whether I should have just agreed to move home. I was reviewing charts in the break room when Dr. Martinez, one of the attending physicians, noticed I seemed off. She asked if everything was okay, and before I knew it, I was telling her the whole story. I explained about my promotion, the fight with my mother, and the horrible things she had said to me. Dr. Martinez listened without interrupting, and when I finished, she was quiet for a moment. Then she asked me something that caught me completely off guard. She wanted to know if I had noticed a pattern with my mother's health crises. She pointed out that from what I had told her, my mom's symptoms always seemed to coincide with my achievements. I started thinking about it more carefully. When I graduated high school as valedictorian, Mom had developed severe back pain that required weeks of bed rest. During my college graduation, she had mysterious digestive issues that kept her home. Medical school graduation brought the chest pains, and my residency acceptance triggered the migraines. Now, with my promotion, she was claiming her overall health was deteriorating. Dr. Martinez suggested that maybe my mother's illnesses weren't as serious as they appeared. She told me about patients she had seen who used medical complaints to manipulate family members, and how these situations could escalate over time. She asked if my mother had ever been hospitalized for any of her conditions or if she had clear diagnoses from specialists. I realized I didn't actually know much about my mother's medical care. She always claimed to be seeing doctors, but she never wanted me involved in her appointments. She said it was too personal and that she didn't want to burden me with the details. Looking back, this seemed strange since she constantly talked about how sick she was. The more I thought about it, the more suspicious the whole situation became. My mother was only 52 years old and had no family history of serious illness. Yet she claimed to have multiple conditions that somehow never had clear diagnostic test results. She always had vague symptoms that couldn't be easily verified, and her doctor supposedly couldn't figure out what was wrong with her. Dr. Martinez encouraged me to trust my instincts and not let guilt cloud my judgment. She reminded me that I had worked incredibly hard to become a doctor, and that my career was important. She also pointed out that healthy families celebrate each other's successes, rather than trying to sabotage them. I spent the rest of my shift thinking about everything she had said. By the end of the day, I had made a decision. I was going to investigate my mother's health claims and find out what was really going on. If she was genuinely sick, I would figure out how to help her while still maintaining my career. But if she was manipulating me, I needed to know the truth. I went home that night feeling more determined than devastated. For the first time in years, I was going to put my own needs first and get to the bottom of this situation. I had no idea how deep the deception went, but I was ready to find out. 1 week later, I decided to take action. I called my mother and told her I wanted to be more involved in her medical care. I explained that as a doctor, I might be able to help coordinate her treatment or provide insights that could improve her quality of life. She seemed pleased that I was finally taking her health seriously, which made what I was planning feel even more necessary. I asked her for the names of her doctors and requested that she sign medical release forms so I could access her records. I told her this would help me understand her conditions better and potentially identify specialists who might be able to help. At first, she seemed agreeable and said she would gather the information for me. But when I followed up a few days later, she started making excuses. She claimed she couldn't find her insurance cards and didn't remember all of her doctor's names. When I offered to help her call her insurance company to get the information, she said she would handle it herself. Days passed with no progress, and she kept giving me different reasons for the delays. Finally, I suggested we go to her primary care physician together. I told her I could take time off work to accompany her to an appointment, and we could discuss her treatment plan with the doctor directly. She agreed but seemed nervous about the idea. The day of the appointment, I met her at Dr. Patterson's office. She had been seeing him for over 10 years, so I figured he would have comprehensive records of her various health issues. In the waiting room, she seemed unusually quiet and kept checking her phone nervously. When we were called back, Dr. Patterson greeted both of us warmly. He remembered me from when I was younger and congratulated me on becoming a doctor. Then he asked what brought us in today. Since my mother's last appointment had been over 6 months ago, I explained that I wanted to better understand my mother's health conditions so I could help coordinate her care. I mentioned the various symptoms she had been experiencing and asked about her current treatment plan. Dr. Patterson looked confused and glanced at my mother before responding. He told me that my mother was actually in excellent health for her age. He said her last physical exam had been completely normal, with good blood pressure, healthy heart rate, and clear lab results. When I asked about her chronic pain and digestive issues, he said she had never mentioned these problems during their appointments. My mother immediately interrupted, claiming that her symptoms had worsened since her last visit. She started listing various complaints, but Dr. Patterson gently pointed out that she hadn't scheduled any appointments to address these concerns. He suggested that if she was experiencing new symptoms, they should discuss them and potentially run some tests. I asked Dr. Patterson if he could provide me with copies of my mother's recent test results and medical records. That's when my mother suddenly became agitated. She said she hadn't signed any release forms, and that she didn't want her medical information shared, even with me. Dr. Patterson explained that he would need her written consent to share detailed records, but he could speak generally about her overall health status. He assured me that based on all of her recent examinations and tests, there were no indications of serious illness or chronic conditions. The appointment ended awkwardly, with my mother clearly upset that I had heard this information. On the drive home, she was silent except to mutter that Dr. Patterson didn't understand how sick she really was. She claimed that doctors often miss things, and that her symptoms were real even if they didn't show up on tests. But I had gotten the confirmation I needed. The clean medical records showing no illness were exactly what I had suspected. My mother wasn't suffering from mysterious health conditions. She was using fake symptoms to manipulate me into giving up my career and moving home to take care of her. 2 weeks later, I decided it was time for a family confrontation. I had spent those weeks documenting every conversation I had with my mother about her health, and I had also done something else that felt necessary but uncomfortable. I had started recording our phone calls. I know recording someone without their knowledge sounds terrible, but I needed proof of what was happening. During our conversations, my mother would make contradictory statements about her symptoms and admit to things that didn't match what she told other people. The recorded phone calls of manipulation attempts became crucial evidence of her deception. I invited my parents to dinner at a restaurant, claiming I wanted to apologize for our fight and discuss how we could work together on Mom's health issues. Dad seemed relieved that I was reaching out, and Mom appeared pleased that I was finally prioritizing her needs. During dinner, I started the conversation by acknowledging that I understood her health was a serious concern for our family. I told her I had been thinking about ways to help, and that I wanted to make sure she was getting the best possible medical care. Then I brought up my conversation with Dr. Patterson. I mentioned that he had seemed surprised by some of the symptoms she had described to me, and that her recent test results had all been normal. I asked if maybe she should get a second opinion or see some specialist to get to the bottom of her health issues. My mother immediately became defensive. She claimed that Dr. Patterson was incompetent and that he had always dismissed her concerns. She said doctors often failed to diagnose women's health problems properly, and that normal test results didn't mean she wasn't suffering. That's when I pulled out copies of her medical records that I had obtained through my own medical contacts. The documents clearly showed years of normal examinations, with no evidence of chronic illness or ongoing health problems. I explained that I had reviewed her entire medical history, and there was no indication of the serious conditions she had been claiming to have. She tried to argue that the records were incomplete or that her symptoms had developed recently. But I had also brought printouts of our text message conversations over the past 2 years, where she had been complaining about the same health issues that supposedly weren't documented anywhere. Dad looked increasingly uncomfortable as the evidence mounted. He had apparently been taking her word about her medical appointments and hadn't realized there was such a disconnect between her claims and her actual health status. Then I played the recordings. I had selected specific clips where my mother admitted that she exaggerated her symptoms to get my attention, and where she talked about wanting me to move home regardless of my career goals. In one particularly damning recording, she had told me that she would do whatever it took to keep me from moving away for fellowship training. The restaurant was relatively quiet, so the audio was clear enough for both of my parents to hear. My mother's face went pale as she listened to her own voice describing how she timed her health crises to coincide with my achievements. In one recording, she had actually laughed about how guilty I felt when she claimed to be in pain. When the recordings finished, there was complete silence at our table. Dad looked shocked and hurt, while Mom looked trapped and angry. She tried to claim that the recordings were taken out of context, but the evidence was overwhelming. I told her that I knew she had been faking her illnesses to manipulate me, and that I wasn't going to sacrifice my career based on lies. I said I was disappointed that she would go to such lengths to control my life, and that her behavior had damaged our relationship possibly beyond repair. She finally admitted that maybe she had exaggerated some of her symptoms, but she claimed it was only because she missed me and wanted me to be closer to the family. She tried to make it sound like her deception came from love, but I could see through that manipulation too. I told both of my parents that I was taking the chief resident position and pursuing my fellowship goals. I said that if Mom wanted a relationship with me going forward, it would have to be based on honesty and respect for my choices. The dinner ended with her storming out of the restaurant, leaving Dad and me to figure out how to move forward. 6 weeks later, I had moved into a new apartment across town and established clear boundaries with my family. Dad and I were slowly rebuilding our relationship, but I had made it clear to Mom that I needed space to process everything that had happened. I told her that any future contact would need to be respectful and honest, with no manipulation or fake health crises. For a while things were quiet. I threw myself into my new role as chief resident and started preparing applications for cardiology fellowships. I was finally able to focus on my career without the constant guilt and worry about my mother's supposed health problems. It felt liberating to make decisions based on my own goals rather than her manufactured emergencies. But the peace didn't last long. My mother had apparently been calling other family members, telling them that I had abandoned her in her time of need. She was painting herself as the victim and claiming that I was heartless for refusing to help my sick mother. Some relatives started reaching out to me, asking why I was being so cruel to her. I had to explain the situation to several aunts and uncles, showing them the same evidence I had presented to my parents. Most of them were shocked to learn about the deception, but a few seemed to think I should forgive her and move on. They said family was more important than career, which showed me that they didn't really understand what had happened. Things escalated when my mother started showing up at my workplace. She would come to the hospital claiming to be having medical emergencies, demanding to see me. The first time it happened, I actually thought she might be genuinely sick, but when the emergency room doctors examined her, they found nothing wrong. After the third incident, hospital security had to get involved. My mother was disrupting patient care and causing scenes in the emergency department. I was embarrassed and frustrated that her manipulation tactics were now affecting my professional environment. The final straw came when she showed up at my new apartment building one evening. I was coming home from a long shift when I found her sitting in the lobby, claiming she had been waiting for hours because she needed to talk to me urgently. When I tried to walk past her to the elevator, she followed me and started yelling about how ungrateful I was. She demanded that I let her into my apartment so we could discuss our relationship properly. When I refused, she became increasingly aggressive. She told me that I owed her for raising me, and that she wouldn't leave until I agreed to quit my job and move back home. She was making such a scene that other residents were staring, and I was worried the police would be called. That's when I realized I needed legal protection. The next day, I went to the courthouse and filed for a restraining order. I had documented all of her harassment, including the incidents at the hospital and the confrontation in my apartment building. I also had the recordings of her admitting to manipulation and the evidence of her faking illness. When I served her with the restraining order, she was furious. She called me screaming about how I was destroying our family, and that she would never forgive me for humiliating her this way. But I felt relieved to finally have legal protection from her behavior. The restraining order required her to stay at least 500 feet away from me, my workplace, and my residence. It also prohibited her from contacting me directly or through third parties. For the first time in months, I felt like I could breathe without worrying about her next manipulation attempt. Epilogue *. It's been 8 months since I got the restraining order, and my life has completely changed. I'm excelling in my chief resident role, and have been accepted into a prestigious cardiology fellowship program at a hospital in another state. For the first time in years, I'm making career decisions based purely on what's best for my professional development. Dad and I have maintained our relationship, though it's been complicated. He's still processing the extent of Mom's deception and manipulation. He started going to therapy to work through his own feelings about being deceived for so many years. We talk regularly, and he's been supportive of my career goals. I haven't had any direct contact with my mother since the restraining order was served. I've heard through Dad that she's been telling people I'm mentally unstable, and that the stress of medical training has made me paranoid. She's apparently still claiming to have various health problems, but Dad is now questioning everything she says and insisting on accompanying her to medical appointments. The hardest part has been accepting that my mother may never acknowledge what she did or genuinely apologize for the years of manipulation. I've had to grieve the relationship I thought we had and accept that it was built on lies and control rather than love and support. But I've also discovered how much lighter life feels without the constant guilt and manufactured crises. I can celebrate my achievements without worrying about triggering her next health emergency. I can make plans for my future without factoring in her demands for attention and caregiving. My fellowship starts in 6 months, and I'm excited about the opportunities ahead. I've learned that sometimes protecting your own dreams and mental health requires making difficult choices about family relationships. It's not the outcome I would have chosen, but it's the one that allows me to live authentically and pursue the career I've worked so hard to build.